Welcome to the Lazy CEO Podcast, where Jim Schleckser, author of Great CEOs Are Lazy and founder of the CEO Project, features compelling experts and topics for CEOs of mid to large-size companies. Now, let's get started with the show.
Welcome, everybody, to another Lazy CEO podcast. My name is Jim Schleckser. I am your host, and I am the founder of the CEO Project. Well, today you've just got me, but, we'll have some fun anyway. I've had a couple of guests lately, which have been really quite awesome, so that's been fun. But I'm going to talk about an important culture issue, which a lot of people don't think about. And as an engineer, I always skew to the hard stuff, right? The technical matter and the numbers and so forth. But it turns out that this factor is at least as important, and we probably underspend time on it, and that is culture. And it's this big word, and what does it mean? But I'm going to just characterize culture as how we do what we do, and it's the way we think about what we do. And any organization you come into, it's palatable, the culture of an organization, and you can even feel like, is this the kind of place I'd like to hang out? Is this the kind of company I'd like to work with if I was going to partner with somebody? And even more, when you think about culture, the number one reason for failure of mergers is a mismatch of cultures. And so part of your due diligence when you think about potentially acquiring a company is to really look deeply at the culture. And I'm going to help you with how to do that. That's actually a really important factor. But let me just step back, going back to my book, Great CEOs Are Lazy, I talk about the job of the engineer and processes and systems. And for those of you who've heard me for a while, I have a sort of a bigger view of what processes and systems are. They're not just the IT systems that move data around the organization. It's not just the SOPs, standard operating procedures, which talk about how humans should act in particular situations. The fries should cook for 2 minutes and 15 minutes, or when somebody wants to do a return, we automatically take it, no questions asked. That's all part of SOP. Culture is all in the soft area. And I've talked before about values and how values guide us in the soft areas where there aren't exactly rules, but culture does the same thing. And so culture is how we do what we do. And I'll get into that in a little bit. But if you want to, you can't define everything either in the IT system or in SOPs and not even in values sometimes. So culture shows up. But I have to say, culture needs to be consistent with the other things. So if you have a culture needs to be consistent with your values. And a lot of people miss this because they put the values on the wall and we're customer centered and we're ethical and we're speedy or whatever your thing is. And yet the culture rejects that like antibodies going after, an infection. So culture and values need to be aligned. So I'm going to just start with an element. This comes from an article I wrote a few years back that talks about what are the measurables around culture. So when you think about culture, how do we define culture? Can it be measured? Can it be analyzed? And the answer is absolutely. So I'm going to run you through a couple of factors that define the culture, and you see really quickly. And for those of you listening, you can play along at home, rate your own company on these factors, and think about how do I fit on each of these as I go through them. And you're basically going to have a definition of your culture. We are fill in the blank, right, as we go down this. So the first one is formality. And this is how formal is the organization. And that shows up a whole bunch of ways when you think about formality. It could be how people dress. I'll give you an example. We worked with a company that was in the ultra high net worth wealth management. They considered themselves bankers, but they were like financial managers. You give them your wealth, and they would invest it and so forth for you. And they wanted to present a very reliable, stable, kind of formal organization, one that could be trusted. So they literally had a company outfit, which was dark blue or black suit, red or blue tie, white shirt. Everybody, it's almost like IBM in the old days. There was an IBM uniform, not anymore, but there was then. There is in that particular company. And so if you're like show up in sweatpants and, polo or whatever kind of person, This organization, from a formality point of view, would be a horrible place for you to work. You would feel like uncomfortable in your skin all the time. So very formal. Go to the other side where you, let's say a Silicon Valley, startup, and, cool t-shirt, jeans, you're good to go. And that's how formal they are. Very informal. But it goes further. It includes things like vocabulary. How informal is the vocabulary when we talk to each other? You could imagine a meeting where people would say, well, I spoke to finance, and finance had a report that talked about this topic, and we're going to get back together with them, and we're going to, as opposed to, hey, Bob and I got together for lunch and we figured out the problem, right? That's a very different level of formality. So how we speak to each other is important. I think within formality is also hierarchy. So there's some organizations that are very hierarchical. The director talks to the vice president, who talks to the senior vice president, who talks to the executive senior vice president, who talks to the CEO, and nobody goes out of channel, right? A military would be relatively more formal organization in terms of chain of command and hierarchy. Excuse me. There's others where, excuse me, where, you want to walk into the CEO's office because you got an idea. That's cool, right? Hey, Bob, Sally, I got a thing I need to talk to you about. Juan, whatever. So formality cuts across an awful lot of things. And I think that's a very fundamental and one of the first measurables within an organization. So the question is, how formal, again, some of those things I talked about, both hierarchy, dress, vocabulary, is your organization? And I can tell you, I've seen mergers attempted between very informal organizations and very formal organizations. And actually, formality generally wins. So formality will drive out informality over time. So if you are a less formal organization merging into generally somewhat larger, more formal organization, over time, your culture will go away, most likely. Okay. So just realize that when you're thinking about putting two companies together, and you'll hear people say, oh, my culture got destroyed. Yeah, because formal drives out informal. Their culture was stronger in that way, and off you go. You have to work to maintain informality. So the second one is analytics. And this is really the use of data to make decisions. And we've all been in companies where it's, it's off the hip, it's very informal, it's very intuitive. We don't need a ton of data to make decisions. This is generally when we're a little earlier in the life cycle of a company, but it can also carry on as we get a bit bigger, that we're willing to take a shot at something that doesn't have to be perfect. We don't need all the data. In fact, I wrote an article about, I think I said 80% of the data is all you need to make a decision. That might even be too high in some of these low data analytic companies. They might say, you know what, 51% of the data is enough for us to make a decision, as long as we can reverse it. So we screw up, we're just going to fix it. So what the heck, let's give it a go at 50%. There are other organizations and leaders that, if it isn't 97 or 98% of the data we need to drive all of the risk out of a decision, we're not doing it. So the default position is don't do it. And the only way to go to do it is gigantic stacks of data. Now, there's a whole view on that, but I'll give you an example. Bridgewater, which was a very famous and very successful hedge fund. This is Ray Dalio's fund. They were hugely analytic. I mean, they took in data, like insane amounts of data to help make their decisions, and data ruled. If you did not have data, they would not make a decision on something, an investment you wanted to make or whatever. There was no intuitive in their decision-making. So fully analytic, hyper detailed, spreadsheets and so forth. And, if you, again, this is similar. If you're going to try to merge with a company that's a high data analytic company, you must have all the data to drive out all the risk before we make a decision. And you guys have been running it, hip pocket style, much more intuitive, much more rapidly moving. That culture will be squeezed out by the more formal analytical culture over time without a huge amount of work. And even if you were the larger and less formal organization, you would find that people that were comfortable, because this goes all the way through, people that were comfortable in a high analytic environment will struggle to operate in a low analytical environment. Because you think about it, we've been like this for a while. We hired people that like to be in an environment like this. These leopards are not going to change their spots and go, oh, thank God, I don't have to do spreadsheets anymore. That's their go-to move. So analytics is really important as well. Alongside that is transparency. So this is the third one. So how transparent are we with data around the organization? Are we willing to share all the data? down to the financials with everybody in the company so they know what's going on? Or are we much more protective about the data? Some things can be shown and some things cannot be shown. And, you can imagine a fully transparent, the executive salaries up on a SharePoint site and everybody can see it because we don't care, down to, if you don't have a need to know, then you don't need to know. And that might be more in a government contracting or maybe in a secure environment. That's clearly got to be the case where the transparency of data is much lower than it would be maybe in a 20-person entrepreneurial company where they basically yell out things and everybody knows exactly what's going on in everybody's business. So transparency is another one to think about. The fourth one is team versus individual. And, you'd argue, well, Jim, it depends on what's going on, whether it's team or individual, but there are companies that skew one way or the other. There's some that they count on kind of heroic efforts and really high performing individuals. Think about a sales environment where it's, red meat eating salespeople, and it's all about individual performance in that case, assuming they could do it without a team. There's other organizations where they go, no, we don't do that. We always bring a team together. We do this collaboratively. We do this collegially. And that's how we make our decisions. And that's how we do our work. There's no like lone rangers in this organization. A very different view of the universe, right? And, maybe a blended one where there are some jobs for an individual and there are some jobs for team might be a more balanced approach, but different organizations have a different view on team versus individual. So again, look at your organization, look at the organizations you work with, and think about, is it team versus individual? I will say that sometimes when companies show up, like I used to have companies, we'd have a meeting with them, and we were generally a little smaller team. The last company I ran, we'd have 3-4 people show up at a fairly significant meeting, but all the key people were there. And the other side happened to be very big and much more formal and much more a bigger organization. They'd show up with 20 people sometimes. That's not team, that's political. So I'm going to get to politics in a minute, but they were there, to be in the room, to make sure they weren't left out, to make sure that they covered their positions and so forth. Sometimes it was informational, but most of the time it was political. So don't confuse, we are team-based execution from we put a cast of thousands in the room. That's different than being team-based. The fifth one here is performance tracking. And this is how rigorous you are about performance tracking of the team and of the organization. There are some organizations hyper analytic, hyper performance based, like they'll post the performance on the wall. Everybody knows how you're doing. And you can almost argue that, and I wrote an article about this, is this more empathy, that we want people to feel good? We respect that they just made a good effort, and we're not quite as concerned about the outcome because we kind of figure that's going to work out, to other organizations that go, look, if you didn't hit the mark, if you didn't hit the numbers, that's a problem. We are all about the performance. We are all about the numbers. And so, again, I'm going to go back to the Bridgewater, and some people, their heads are going to explode when I describe this, but in meetings, live, while you're making a presentation, everybody around the table is rating you as you speak. And it's red, yellow, green. And you can watch your performance on the board as you're, let's say you start off really strong and then you start getting a little lost in the details, or you're not really making your point. It starts going yellow. Some start going red. Real time while you're performing, they give you immediate feedback on your performance. And it has a very clarifying effect on, I'm not hitting the mark. I need to change what I'm doing. But some people can't handle an environment like that. Is so hyper performance oriented, immediate feedback. Again, I think they're an extreme example, but think about, are you Bridgewater, or are you like, hey, whatever, like we get there when we get there, as long as people are having fun and working hard, we don't really care. So performance and kind of how hard that is. And this correlates to the analytics, right? A very high performance monitoring business will generally be a more analytic business, but they also have a level of transparency. Kind of everybody knows where they stand. Like that example of Bridgewater is hyper transparent. Like you walk out of the meeting and you know how you did. You got a score on your performance in the meeting. So that's performance tracking. I'm going to go to innovation and curiosity is another one. And we've all bumped into organizations that are frankly not curious. They're not looking for a better answer. Usually they've got a pretty good answer. They're not curious about another answer. They just want to execute what they've got. They don't want to vary from it. They don't want R&D projects. They don't want people going off on skunk works. That's not what we're about here. We're about execute the heck out of exactly what we've got. And if you've heard me talk before about the bases of competition, right? You can be either a cost-based competitor or a customer intimate competitor where you get your customers really well, or an innovation competitor like 3M or Google or one of those. This would generally sit in a cost-based competitor where operational excellence, being amazingly fast and low cost and efficient in your operations, will generally be these people that are low innovation, low curiosity. You'll generally see higher innovation, higher curiosity if they are an innovation competitor. We always have the cool new stuff. Or if they're customer intimate, they'll innovate in the direction of customer needs. So you'll see that one as well. But, is it a learning culture? Are we trying to constantly grow ourselves? Are we trying always to come up with a better answer? Or are we pretty happy how we are? You might be listening and say, gee, Jim, I think everybody has to always try to get better. And I'm going to go, yeah. But it looks very different by company. The words may sound the same, but how it shows up in the company can vary tremendously, and it's very palatable. And so I'm going to say, if somebody presents that they're innovative, I'd want to plumb this particular item on their culture of show me how you're innovative, show me how you're curious, show me how your organization learns, so I'll believe you actually are an innovator and somebody we'd want to be with. The next one is frugality. And this is really about the attitude towards money and spending inside the organization. And there are organizations that they just spend. They will spend on anything. Hire consultants? Sure. Throw a big, sales meeting in the Caribbean? Sure. Usually they're pretty successful to be able to enable that. But there are other organizations that are very, very frugal. They do not want to spend money, even if they've got it, right? So this could be a company that is quite successful, quite profitable, and yet, to approve another box of pencils, I got to get 3 levels of authority to get my box of pencils approved, or a new computer, or whatever it is. There are other companies that go, look, it's only a couple $1,000, just spend it. Nobody needs to know about it. Just do it. And so you can imagine a frugal environment. I'm not saying like wild spender, but there's more limited controls around spending, understanding that we have to spend to be profitable. Now, sometimes that can get out of control. And I've talked before about how in boom cycles, spending tends to get a little more out of control. And so a recessionary, a little more difficult period, we tend to tighten down and get a little more aggressive on spending. I'm talking about companies that it doesn't matter what's going on in the market. It doesn't matter what's going on in the business. They are always frugal. They are always penny pinchers. They are always trying to squeeze the dollar out. Now, for some people, that's their way of looking at the world anyway. They're going to be happy goldfish in that pond, right? They're going to love the fact that they look at money the way I look at money, and I make sure I squeeze every penny. So I'm a happy person. But can you imagine somebody that was maybe more of a spender, or, you got to spend money to make money kind of view of the universe in a frugal environment? They would suffer. Like, why do I have to get 4 levels of approval to buy a new computer? This makes no sense, right? So frugality is an important one. And you'll see these companies constantly talking about budget. Let's update the budget. Where are we against budget? Like, those are the kind of signals I would look for. Levels of approval and use of the word budget, and using the budget to manage the business super actively would generally make me think it's a frugal environment versus a less frugal environment. One of my favorites, and I've only got 2 more here, and I'm going to talk about some other things for a little bit, is humor. And there are some cultures where humor is just not acceptable. You don't laugh, you don't make fun, maybe on little things, but not about business things, because that's serious, right? And so again, this would tie to formality and some of the other things I've talked about, where you're not going to go to a meeting and laugh. That's not going to happen. They are serious organizations. They don't use humor to solve problems. They don't use humor to relieve stress in a meeting. There are other organizations, maybe push it too far, where it's a chuckle box, right? Where we're always laughing, we're always having fun. And we're not, and I would say that when you go too far that direction, things like performance tracking, you're probably not a high performance tracking environment if you're all about having fun and having humor. And so I think, Jim's opinion, the balance of humor at appropriate and maybe even slightly inappropriate times is okay, but we got to actually get the work done as well and measure ourselves. So again, look at the organization. I've seen some organizations where They're all empathy. They're all humor. Everybody loves working there. They talk about how they have zero turnover because everybody loves working here so much, but they don't get much done. It's super high empathy. They're low performance. Again, if you're a high performance, low empathy environment, you're going to struggle to work with that company, even on a project basis, let alone trying to put those two companies together. So humor is really important, and they kind of tie with some of the other ones. And then the last one is just conformity. So I talk about all these factors, right? Formality and humor and so forth. And you could imagine a culture where sort of loyalty and conformance is really important. So we do things a certain way, and damn it, everybody does it that way, exactly that way. We're not going to tolerate outliers here. We're not looking for people to go off the ranch and do weird things. That is not what we're about here. We are about loyalty and conformity. Having said that, there are other cultures that are super tolerant of outliers. They view that creativity as there may be diamonds inside that creativity. And we'll take a spread of people and types of people because we get better answers. And we really genuinely believe that. There are other times I've walked into the meeting and I go, do you guys all shop at the same exact store? Like, you all look the same, you all talk the same, you are super high conformance in terms of how you behave. And that's the culture, to be conformant. In fact, it's almost, again, it's like if I showed up and the dress was, blue jacket, red tie, white shirt, and I show up in, a purple plaid shirt, and even if it looked good, they go, hey, dude, what are you wearing? Like, that is not the uniform around this place. So you would have social and other pressures to come into conformity even maybe a boss saying, Jim, you're not dressing appropriately for the job. High conformity environments, you need to look a certain way. I did want to mention, just going back to team and individuals, a quick story. Netflix is all about the team, super team oriented. We do everything in teams. And they have a rule. And again, I wrote an article about this years ago about brilliant jerks. And you may have heard me speak about it, where you have somebody who's an incredibly high individual performer, like super smart, always has the answer, but they are, frankly, a jerk. They're not somebody people like to work with. They got an attitude, they're arrogant, whatever. And some companies would go, you know what? Because they're so dang good at what they do, we tolerate it. Netflix doesn't do that. They go, look, the team has primacy. That is negative to team behavior. We exit those people. So they don't tolerate brilliant jerks. They exit from the organization. So you think, hey, I'm God's gift to engineering, and you show up at Netflix, you probably will have a very short career at Netflix if you can't suppress that attitude quite significantly. So that's an example of team versus individual. So those are some of the factors, as you think about your business, as you think about a business you might partner with, as a business you might merge with. And people say, like, the cultures are mismatched. And they go, well, what does that mean? I think hopefully thinking about these axes, these measurement factors, you go, why are they mismatched? Well, they're much more formal than we are. They are all about individual performance and not team performance. They're super frugal when we are not. Like, you can be very clear about why is there a mismatch in culture. And again, whether you're thinking about partnering or merging or whatever, you could ask yourself the question, is it even possible for us to bring them into our culture or not? And you hear a lot of people after they do a combination, we're doing a lot of culture work. We're really trying to bring them in. But I'm going to suggest that I would do an inventory like this of your organization and the target organization before you ever put them together, because that's going to be one of the most significant predictors of success of the merger in the first place. So let me just talk about a couple of things of how do you manage this? Okay, great, Jim. I measured it. I'm whatever I am, right? Low formality, high humor. I'm whatever I am. What do I do? How do I manage it as a leader? And there are a couple of factors that you can do as a leader to manage and control your culture. Well, one is modeling. And so as leaders, I think if we have a goal, we want to be less formal, let's say, or we want to begin to use more humor and lighten up the organization, for example, or we want to use more data analytics, because I don't think we use enough data analytics when we're making decisions. You need to model that behavior completely consistently as a leader. So in a meeting, you should find humor, consciously to demonstrate to people that it is okay to use humor in a meeting, okay? If you want to move to a more analytical position, your first question should always be, do we have the data we need to make this decision? Or I think we need more data to make this particular decision. And so your modeling, your behavior, people take their cues from us. And so if you want to shift the culture over time in a direction, you, and frankly, your direct reports, should consciously and super consistently model exactly the culture you're trying to shift to. And I'm going to say, you can't make big shifts, not quickly. You can make small shifts slowly. And so if you're trying to move me from A to B in a very big way, that is a long process. Even if you get like early indications people are starting to move in that direction, it takes quite a while to fully embed it in a culture in a way that, like, this is how we do things. And it's got to be second nature to be culture, not like I got to think about how we do it and then I do it that way. So I'm just going to end on this. There are two really interesting other techniques besides modeling that we can use to drive culture. And those are stories and symbols. Again, this is all in the soft, squishy stuff, which I, as an engineer, don't get as well as I should. But we'll talk about stories. So think about Jesus. Jesus told parables. Those stories that Jesus told 3,000 years ago last to this day. If you go to the Old Testament, the stories that are told in the Old Testament are even older, 4,000 years old. We still talk about them today, the story of the talents and so forth. So stories last. Stories are what people remember. There's a book by the Heath brothers called Made to Stick. It talks all about the use of stories and why people remember stories. Aesop's Fables. People remember Aesop's Fables because they remember stories. They're not going to remember your PowerPoint presentation. They're going to remember your stories. And so one story, and this is very tribal, but, you know, at the end of the day, we are a tribal people. Even today, even more so with the internet, where I think we've become very, very tribal. Look at what's going on in politics. We're very tribal. So one story that stuck with me is the story of FedEx. And this is in the old days when they talked about the packages absolutely positively had to be there overnight. And they took that really seriously. So there was a driver who was up in the hinterlands of Minnesota. He went to take the packages out of a box, one of these giant metal mailboxes. Key breaks off in the lock. Can't open the box. There are packages inside that absolutely positively have to be there the next day. That was their culture. That's their values. So he got, I don't know where he got it, but he got a settling torch. He cut the four legs off of the box, throws the box into the truck, drives it to the airport where they were able to drill out the lock, open it up, get the packages out, and they were delivered the next day. So FedEx tells this story to this day because this is the kind of culture they want, that we will do whatever it takes to deliver for our customers. That's part of their culture, right? It's a performance-based culture. And if that means you have to, frankly, damage company property to do that, we do it because the customer's first for us in our culture. You could imagine another organization that driver would have gotten in a heck of a lot of trouble. Like, we're taking that out of your pay, buddy. Like, you damaged company property. You realize what those boxes cost and you destroyed one. So that story resonates around the organization. Another organization that has great stories to reinforce their culture is Nordstrom. I'll give you, I mean, they've got dozens of them, but I'll give you another one, Stu Leonard's after that. But Nordstrom is all about customer service. So they talk about the story about somebody brought back tires to Nordstrom and they wanted to return tires, car tires. The clerk met the person. They said, oh, yes, certainly. Tires, we'll take back that return. And they took the return and they gave the person the money. The rest of the story is Nordstrom's doesn't sell tires. They took them back anyway. So this is how committed they are to, that's our culture. That's how we do things. Did that person get in trouble for giving that person $500 for these tires that they'll never use? Nope. They use that story to reinforce their culture. They tell that story to this day. So that's a great story. So stories work. And I would encourage you to look for stories, look for heroes inside your organization that are culture warriors. They represent your culture. Find stories around those people that you can tell. When you get up and you do your PowerPoint, talk about, you know, Juan and how he did what he needs to get a product to a client, because that's our culture. Get it done for clients. That's our culture. Make Juan a hero and people will remember the story. So look for stories, tell stories. Look at politicians. They know how to do this. They talk about their platform, but then they immediately tie it to a story, right? Joe the plumber from Ohio, or whatever the story is. They always tie it to a human, and they tell a story about him, because people will remember the story. They will not remember the position. Same thing goes for all of us as leaders. So tell stories. And the second item that fits into this, things we don't think about, is symbols. So symbols are profoundly important to an organization and to people, and they remember symbols. Symbols are fused with meaning, but what's cool as a leader is you get to choose the meaning of the symbol. It has to be consistent, it has to make sense, but you get to choose. And so you can pick things and create them as a symbol and use them to mean things about your culture. So the example here is, there was a hospital administrator that took over for a prior individual. Very hierarchical, very communicate through channels. You didn't get to talk to the president of the hospital unless you were a senior executive vice president. They didn't walk around the halls. Super formal culture. New individual comes in and he goes, look, I'm going to make this a much more informal culture. That's part of my goals. So he literally had the maintenance guys take the door off his office. He said, I got an open door policy. This is part of becoming less formal. And he was super consistent about the open door policy. Anybody walked in, he talked to them. Nurse, janitor, did not matter. So again, back to modeling, he had to model the behavior. But he took the door off. He had them hang it in the lobby of the hospital. So every day when people walked into that building, they saw that stupid door hanging in the lobby, and they're like, it was infused with meaning that we open up communication. It's open door. We're informal. You can talk to anybody. He didn't have to say anything. People saw it. It had meaning. Symbols had a power. It's as good as a story. So think about, in your organization, are there symbolic elements that you can use to infuse with meaning that support the culture that you're trying to generate, particularly if you're trying to shift the culture like this hospital administrator did? So that's kind of all I had on culture, how you measure it, how it's part of your operating system, some tools you can use to move culture over time. But it's super powerful. And, and I go back to, you're going to hire a certain kind of people. A certain kind of people are going to want to be in a company given its culture, because it matches their values. It matches how they view the universe. So managing culture and thinking about hiring people that fit that culture is really important. And I'm going to say that I talked before about, turnovers about the manager, but also turnovers about the culture. So it may be great work. It may be exactly what I want to do. And it may be a culture that doesn't fit me. They're super frugal or super formal or whatever they are. And I'm uncomfortable in my skin every day I walk into work. That'll show up as a turnover problem. And so culture can really drive that one as well. So hopefully you've got a few ideas about culture. Again, it's a soft and squishy topic, but hopefully you got a few thoughts about how to manage it, how to measure it, and maybe how to improve your culture going forward. So thanks for joining us. We really appreciate it. We'll see you next time on the Lazy CEO Podcast.
This podcast is brought to you by the CEO Project. At the CEO Project, we work with CEOs to help them grow their business. And our members represent billions of dollars of revenue and profit. And frankly, amongst all of us, we've probably made every mistake in the book, including some you haven't made yet. So if you want to learn from the experience of a bunch of really seasoned CEOs, we're a great place to hang out. In this podcast, what you're going to hear are some of those ideas, concepts, and things that are just going to help you on your journey. If you want to find out more, reach out to us at theceoproject.com, or you can contact me personally at jim@theceoproject.com. Happy listening.
Thanks for listening to the Lazy CEO Podcast. We'll see you next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes, and check out our website, www.theceoproject.com.